Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Santana. This is Felix.
Hey, Felix.
Hey, yes, you're on the air now with myself and my co-host, Austin. Thank you again for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to join us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It is an honor, sir. And I wanted to go ahead and start off with just asking a couple of questions. I know my co-host may have a couple of questions, and let's have some fun.
Sounds good.
I wanted to actually ask you, what sparked your interest in professional wrestling what got you into wanting to watch it and even to become a professional wrestler when you were younger?
Well, I never watched professional wrestling growing up. I was playing football at West Texas State University at A&M, and our quarterback was Tully Blanchard. And my junior year, they started talking to me about becoming a professional wrestler because my father was a promoter in San Antonio. And at the time, I really didn't have much interest in wrestling. But when I graduated from college, Joe Blanchard, started talking to me about how much money and what a career I could have in wrestling. And after I went to Kansas City and played in Kansas City, and then I ended up getting cut and went to Vancouver for the BC Lions in Canada. I started thinking about, professional wrestling because, Joe Blanchard's talking to me about quite a bit more money in wrestling than I was making in football. So it was all about finances.
Absolutely. And then you actually decided to go ahead and pursue a career in professional wrestling. Now, how did you come about to be put in contact with Vince? I believe it was Vince McMahon Sr., or was it Vince Jr. that hired you?
It was Vince Sr. that hired me.
How did you get in contact with McMahon?
I had been in the business. I started out in Florida and was there for a little while, and then I went to Atlanta for Ted Turner. It was the NWA at the time, and then I went to Charlotte. And then I don't know if you remember Black Jack Mulligan and Dick Murdoch.
Absolutely.
They bought the Texas territory from the Funk Brothers in Amarillo, Texas. And that's right outside where I went to college. And they brought me in, and they made me a bunch of promises, and it turned out to be a bunch of lies, and they didn't really have any plans for me. And Andre the Giant happened to come in, and I had become good friends with Andre the Giant, and he took a tape and showed it to Vince McMahon Sr., and that's how I ended up in New York in 1979.
So you were talking about how you weren't really interested in professional wrestling beforehand, but when you got into professional wrestling, did the like they say, the bug bite you? Did you start to actually have a love for it?
Yeah, I mean, Terry Funk was a big influence. As a matter of fact, I almost quit because I went to Florida with Tully Blanchard. When Tully Blanchard was a year behind me. When he graduated, we both went to Tampa, Florida, and he, of course, he grew up in the business. His father was a promoter. He went right into wrestling, and I was just training and not knowing anything about the business. I wasn't. They thought I was going to be ready in 2 weeks. Well, it's a hard business, and you need a lot of training, and it's a hard business to learn. And I wasn't. I was there for about a month and a half, and I was paying rent, sharing an apartment, but I was paying rent. And Terry Funk came into town, and I told Terry, Terry, he was the world champion, and he asked me how I liked the business, and I said, I love the business, but I think I'm going to just, stop and go back home and start training, and because I had signed a contract to go back to the BC Lions after I had been there 1 year. And he said, well, let me talk to Eddie Graham, who was a promoter in Florida. And then I started getting booked after that. And I told Terry, I said, I'd like to stay in the business, 5 years. And Terry just started laughing. He says, my boy, he said, once you get into the business, it gets in your blood. And sure enough, it does get in your blood. And here I am. I still do appearances from time to time.
That's awesome.
30-something years later.
Now, when Vince Jr. started to take over, for his father, and eventually take over, really take over the wrestling world at one point. I mean, back then, he was going to take a gamble on WrestleMania, and I know at that point you were with the company. But when they had told you about the idea or the concept of WrestleMania, how did you feel about it? Did you think it was going to be as successful as it was? I mean, obviously you did wrestle in the very first WrestleMania. Do you still have fond memories of that night?
I do have fond memories, and that night is when we first realized the growth of the plan that Vince had. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. I mean, Vince Sr. got sick, and he handed over the business to Vince Jr., and then Vince bought out. He had other partners, Gorilla Monsoon and Arnold Stolen and Phil Zacco. They had Vince Sr. owned 50% or 51%, and the other guys owned 49%. And nobody knew what plans Vince had other than himself and probably his dad. But his dad passed away shortly after that. But he bought them out, and he owned it strictly by himself. And a lot of the guys, because he wouldn't let the magazines stop coming into the building, and we were not getting any publicity, and none of us knew that he was planning, his own magazine and the plans that he had. So Vince knew where he was headed, but and maybe Pat Patterson and a few other guys that were in the office. But the rest of us, we just saw it grow. All of a sudden we're going into Minnesota. All of a sudden we're going into Louisiana. All of a sudden we're going into Atlanta. We're going into California. The WWF just kept on growing, and we started going into big places, and Hulk Hogan was in the territory. Myself, with Junkyard Dog. Vince had a plan, and he went to, in my opinion, went and got all the ethnic groups like Hispanics and blacks and Italians and the best that he could find, and that's how he started, and before you know it, it started catching on, and after a while, we made some trips where we wrestled in California and Michigan, and different and big buildings that would hold 20-some thousand people, and we'd be lucky we had 1,500 people, and it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of hard work, and the wrestlers, of course, we took a lot of pride, and we worked really hard, and then all of a sudden it started turning around, and then before you know it, it really got hot, and those 20,000 buildings, we were turning away as many people as were inside the buildings. I mean, we'd get there, and you could see never before, and I don't think they'll ever see it again, where the people were, they'd line them up like you do in amusement parks, but going around the building, and it was a good sight when we get there, to see all the fans that were waiting to get into the arenas.
Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine how crazy it must have been back then, and then to be in that elite class of wrestlers that was around at that time. Like you mentioned, guys like Hulk Hogan, Junkyard Dog, eventually that came on board, Macho Man Randy Savage, Rick Martel, who came on later. A whole bunch of people that came on, and they started obviously the rock and wrestling era in the mid to late 80s, and WrestleMania obviously kicked off, and you definitely got to compete in WrestleMania 1 and continued on up until about WrestleMania. I mean, you were obviously in actually almost every WrestleMania until WrestleMania 8. And you got to face
I actually wrestled in the first 9 WrestleManias. WrestleMania
actually,
9
you're right.
You're
right. You're right. You actually did. I did read something about that. My mistake.
Yeah.
But going into the WWF in the mid to late 80s. Did you have? I mean, you obviously worked with some of the biggest names. Was there some people that you enjoyed working with more than others? I mean, did you really enjoy working with everybody? Was there some people that were harder to work with than others? I mean, who were some of your favorites to work with that you got to work with quite a bit?
Well, of course, the biggest feud that I was ever involved in with me versus Greg the Hammer Valentine, and I mean that was the longest feud in the history of the WWF. We wrestled against each other. And now, you don't have the long-lasting feud, so I don't think anybody will ever wrestle, as much as we did. But, besides him, I mean, everybody was so good. But the next favorite wrestler that I had a lot of chemistry, we had fantastic matches, was Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. And
he was an intense competitor. I bet he was very good in the ring. He definitely was awesome.
Yeah. And, again... Kurt Hennig was also, I used to have some great matches with Kurt Hennig. I mean, it was very enjoyable when you knew that you were going to go in there and, the chemistry was there, and of course everybody, really worked hard back then. They still do.
Of course. Speaking of Kurt, you were in the finals of the Intercontinental Tournament to crown a new IC champ, and you actually were facing Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, and that's where he became the new champion and announced Bobby the Brain Heenan as his manager. What was it like working with, obviously, Bobby the Brain? I mean, obviously, you faced a lot of the Heenan family members. I bet he was, back then, he had so much heat. He had the crowds. I mean, he was a guy that people loved to hate. And I bet he was just quite the character back then. Do you have any memories of Bobby that you care to share about, or?
Yeah, I mean, he was a master at getting heat. The managers back then were so different than the managers that you have today. I mean, they were so talented. They knew when to get heat, but they didn't take away from the match. They didn't want the heat on them. For the most part, they wanted the heat on the guy that they were managing. So they didn't try to steal the show. Because they realized that it was the wrestler who was drawing the money, not the managers. You just needed both of them. But Bobby was a master. He was fantastic.
So
Go ahead.
The Intercontinental Championship, you held that title and you were one of the greatest, no doubt. But I wanted to ask you, how was that your time, holding it? Did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, I mean, in my opinion, when I was the Intercontinental Champion, and then I lost it to Greg the Hammer Valentine, which was the second time that I had held the title. When I was wrestling, in the main event against Greg the Hammer Valentine, we were the main event in a lot of the big buildings without Hulk Hogan, and we were selling out the big buildings. I mean, the Intercontinental title started meaning, a lot more, as the years went on. And then Macho Man got it, and then Ultimate Warrior got it, and to me, at one point, the Intercontinental title was had as much pull as the world title.
Absolutely. And at one point, you actually became tag team champion before you became IC champ, and you actually got to work with the Polish Power Ivan Putski, and got to win the tag team championship back in 1979. But you also got to work with Rick Martel. I mean, two different types of characters to work with, but both very good in the ring. Was there a particular reign that you remember most, and what was different? I mean, obviously with the obvious differences between Rick and Ivan, what was one thing more different that you can explain as far as working with them that you would care to share about Rick and Ivan? That obviously you had the Strike Force. Most people remember the Strike Force right off the bat, but not many people, at least today, unless they do their history, remember the title run back in '79. What were some fond memories of working with Ivan that you'd care to share?
Well, of course, they were completely different style wrestlers. Rick and I had similar styles, and we really clicked right off the bat. Ivan Putski was a strong guy, was a Polish character, and to me, getting teamed up with Ivan Putski was my biggest break in professional wrestling. He was already established, and when they teamed me up with him, it elevated me, from somebody who had his ears wet, still wet behind the ears. All of a sudden, I'm a world tag team champion. I had notoriety all over the world. Japan. I became big in Japan, and just because being the world title champion, tag team champion in the WWF. There were completely different styles. When I wrestled with Ivan Putski, usually I was the one that I was the weak link, and I knew that. And they used to get the heat on me, and I'd give Ivan Putski usually the hot tag, and Ivan Putski would come in and clean house. By the time I teamed up with Rick Martel, I was a lot more polished, and I was really a good worker by then and a good wrestler. And, I feel that Rick Martel and myself, we were equals, and we both knew what we were doing. So, there was no weak links, and there was a difference. And of course, wrestling was a lot bigger. When Strikeforce united.
And as far as with the Strikeforce goes, with Rick Martel, do you feel that they might have disbanded the team too soon? Do you think the Strikeforce could have gone on a little longer than it did, or do you feel that maybe it was a time for you to go ahead and break out and be the single star again and pursue singles gold again?
I don't think we went as long as we could, but it was no fault of anybody. Rick had to take some time off. There was an illness in the family, and he had to go back to Canada and take care of business and be with his family. And
of course,
I would have done the same thing. And that's the real reason why we ended up dropping the belts, and him being missing for quite a while, and it was a bad break for me, but life went on.
Of course.
So WrestleMania 8, came around, and you actually had the opportunity to wrestle Shawn Michaels. Did you have any idea that he would be, a future Hall of Famer?
Well, I knew that Shawn was very talented, and there was a lot of buzz that he was going to be starting to get pushed pretty heavy, and so I knew that Vince McMahon is such a good promoter that if he wants to get somebody over, he'll get you over. I just wish that he had given me a few more good years, because I felt that I was over pretty big, that I still had a lot to offer, but maybe they thought that I had been in the WWF long enough. They had to create new stars. I mean, I don't know what their thinking was in the background. I know that after a while I just wasn't in their plans, and they created El Matador Tito Santana, and they really didn't have any plans for El Matador Tito Santana. I realized that shortly after they established El Matador.
Now, how did they come about the idea of going with El Matador?
Vince McMahon, all the ideas were Vince's.
Oh, okay. And at this point, you actually you started in, and then you had a decent run with WWE, and went on to you actually, many people may not know or may remember that you actually had at least a one-time appearance in WCW, and this was in early 2000. Did they? I mean, during the late '90s, mid '90s, when WCW was starting to pick up some little bit of momentum, did they approach you to come in did Eric Bischoff approach you to come into WCW to help out and promise money like he did everybody else, obviously at that time, who he was trying to lure away from WWE to try to put him out of business, so to speak? Yeah,
I would have had an opportunity to go to the WCW, but once I left the WWF, I had no intentions on going back on the road. I mean, I didn't mind going, and doing a 1 or 2 night weekend match, but my time on the road, I had been in the business for 17 years nonstop, and I had 3 boys and young kids at home, and I just wanted to be a father and a husband, and I wanted to be home. I had done my time. The business had been good to me, and I just didn't want to be on the road anymore.
And at that point, you actually, we're going to rewind just a little bit, because most people who haven't seen the little interview that you did with CBS, most people didn't know, or at least personally I didn't, and I'll admit that, because I've been a fan of yours for many, many years, but I did not realize that you had an opportunity to pursue teaching before you became a wrestler. And after wrestling, you decided to go that route to be a teacher, to educate, and obviously you feel that's been, and it is actually a more rewarding type of experience for you, because you get to educate children and make an impact in their lives, and I think you have. I mean, how did you come about? Did you go back to school, or did you already have your degree as a teacher after you left wrestling, or how did that come about that you went back to school?
No, when I was playing football in college, I got my degree in college. I graduated, with a degree, and I went into I had a double major, physical education with a Spanish minor, and my gym teacher in 8th grade was the one that, to me, there's always somebody who makes a difference in your life, and when you need somebody to help you, and I believe that he was responsible for steering my life in the right direction. I could have gone either way, and he got me involved in sports. I was a migrant worker, and I really didn't start going to school full time till my freshman year in high school. And I realized how much he had done for me. I got a full ride to play football, in college, and if it hadn't been for me, I would have never, gone out for football. And I just felt that, if he made a difference for one person, I wanted to pursue the same direction and make a difference for somebody. And then I got the opportunity to get into teaching. I never realized that I was going to become a teacher, because I'd been out of education for so many years. I played professional football for 2 years, and I wrestled for 17, and then me and Sergeant Slaughter tried to promote the American Wrestling Federation for a couple of years, and you're talking about 20 years in between, and I started out as a substitute teacher, and I didn't even know if I was going to like it, and that's how I got back into education, and I've been doing it this is going to be my 17th year, and it's been important to me, and I believe that I have made a difference with some of the students.
And what I really want to know is, how do your students come off, like, with to have their teacher as a WWE Hall of Fame? Like, how do they react to that?
Well, like students, of course, they were not around. They were not alive when I was wrestling. But now that they have the internet, they all know about me because of their parents. So they think it's pretty cool to have a famous teacher, because the cameras have gone in, about 3 or 4 times when I've been in there, different interviews, different newspapers, different TV channels have done interviews, about my career and teaching and stuff, and they do get a big kick, and they think it's cool to have a famous teacher.
Hey, I would too. So WWE Hall of Famer as my teacher.
In 1997, since you were mentioning a few years back, and we were talking about the late 90s, you were definitely brought back in as a commentator. Was that something that you enjoyed doing? Did you really, have a feel for it? Was it something that you really didn't care for, but you did it because, well, let's put it this way. Some people like commentating, some people don't. Some people feel it was for them, some people don't. How did you feel about being a commentator for the Spanish announced team back in the late 90s? What do you remember most about that?
Well, I really enjoyed it, and you know, being a Mexican American and not being around Hispanics to speak Spanish, I had forgotten a lot of Spanish. I mean, I was still fluent, but there was a lot of words that just wouldn't come off, you know, right off my tongue. And so I was learning, and I did it for almost a year, and I was doing it with the main guy, Carlos, was excellent. And then they had gotten rid of Hugo, and he had to take care of some legal stuff, and he was gone for almost a year, and I replaced him, and I was getting better, you know, and a lot of fans enjoyed me being there, and Hugo came back, and you know, I got to give Vince credit, you know, he straightened out his problems, and he brought him back, and Hugo and Carlos were really good friends, you know, more than Carlos and myself. So from what I understand, you know, there was some politics, and you know, all of a sudden they're knocking me and put me down, and before you know it, I was out. You know, and that was okay. You know, because you know, it was okay with me. I had no animosity towards anybody.
Yeah, no, you definitely stayed loyal to the McMahons throughout the years, and even up to the point. I mean, they came at 2004 came around, and you, of all people, definitely deserved to be into the Hall of Fame because of the career you had. You faced some of the all-time greats, had some of the greatest feuds, and 2004 came around, and you went into a class with the likes of course, Bobby Heenan, Big John Studd, JYD. And when they called you to go into this class, what were your immediate thoughts going in? Were you think it was, I mean, do you feel it was too soon? Do you feel, you know what, I think it's time people got to know who, you know, my career, and I'm honored to take it. What were your thoughts going into the Hall of Fame?
Well, I don't remember what year it was, the very first Hall of Fame they had. I know it was in the 90s. In Baltimore, when they inducted Pedro Morales into the Hall of Fame, and I drove to Baltimore, and they inducted him and a few others, and it was just a very, very small induction. So you know, I have no interest in you know, getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. When I got the phone call, the only thing that mattered to me was, you know, how much are you going to pay me? You know, and then when they told me what I was going to get paid, it was worth me going there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had any interest. And I never realized the enormity of how the business had grown, because I don't watch it. I don't go to events, and when I got there, and you know, Vince McMahon, my family came from Texas, and you know, Vince send a couple of limousines to pick us all up and put us all up at the airport, at the hotel, at the Hyatt in downtown New York, and everything was first class. And then the way the fans responded,
absolutely.
I would have really kicked myself in the butt if I hadn't, you know, if I hadn't been there, you know, because I never realized how big it was, you know, the business had been getting, you know, and I'm truly really proud to be considered a Hall of Famer in the WWE now. You know, it turned out to be one of the best things that I ever did in professional wrestling.
You definitely paved the way. You mentioned Pedro Morales. You're in the same category. You definitely paved the way for Mexican American, Latinos, you know, in the wrestling business today. Guys like you paved the road for guys like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, you know, and some of the others who were. I mean, they are established too, but you definitely got the ball rolling for them to be, you know, for WWE to recognize it obviously as a global phenomenon that it is, you know.
And in 2004, Eddie Guerrero was there, you know, that happened to be wrestling, and I think he was a world champion at the time. And
yes, sir.
So he came up to me and thanked me for opening the doors for Hispanics in the WWF, and I thought that was awesome. He made me feel good when he gave me the credit for opening the door.
Absolutely.
I was a good role model for everybody, and I was very loyal to the company, and I didn't get involved with drugs, and I made all the shows, and I was just a good role model.
And during that time, obviously you were definitely a role model, and that goes without saying. I wanted to ask. Now I remember hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, sir. During the time in the 80s that Hulk was on top of the company, and people say he would be selling. When he was on the card, the buildings obviously would be sold out and everybody made money. I mean, obviously Hulk Hogan was quite a phenomenon in the 80s and even all the way up until now. Do you have any possible maybe a road story that you may have of working in the 80s that you'd care to share, or do you remember or anything that you'd like to share about that time in the 80s or 90s?
Well, Hogan and I, and Brutus and Barbara Beefcake and Mr. Wonderful and B. Brian Blair, we all started in 1977, in Florida, and when I became the World Tag Team Champion in 1979, Hogan had just come in to New York himself, and he was pretty green. We had some matches against each other, so we were, both of us were still pretty green. And then after I dropped the belt, I went to Japan, and Hogan also finished up in New York. And he went to Japan, and we were on the plane coming back, and Fred Blassie was in Japan because Fred Blassie was managing Hulk Hogan, and Hogan tells me that they want him to paint his hair red, and he had already, he had already left WWF, but they wanted him to stay away and come, paint his hair red, I guess, and keep him out for a while and then bring him back. And Hogan says, I don't think I'm going to do that. And before you know it, from what I hear, Gino Monsoon and Dino Bravo and Hulk Hogan, and I don't know if anybody else got a letter from Sylvester Stallone to do the Rocky movie. And I believe that Hulk was the only one that answered it, and that's why he got the part. And after I went to Minnesota, and then Hogan went to Minnesota, so I was with Hulk pretty much most of my career. So you're right. Once he got over, once he came back, Vern Gagne brought him into the territory. They were going to make him a heel, and Johnny Valiant was his manager, and they. When you bring a big heel in, you'd always put like a couple of young guys with him on TV, and he'd beat both of them up and get heat. And Hogan would come out with the cape that he wore in the Rocky movie, and the more he beat up guys, the more people cheered him. They tried to make him a heel, and the people weren't buying it. The people turned him babyface, and they ended up sending Valiant home, and Hogan ended up becoming the biggest thing in Minnesota. All of a sudden, you're getting huge crowds in Minnesota, and I was a recipient of good payoffs because of the big crowds that all of a sudden we were drawing in Minnesota.
So, do you keep in contact with the wrestlers you worked with?
My best friend is Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. At the time, it was funny, because wrestling is a business, and people don't understand this. I was a baby face most of my career. Well, all of my career, I was never a heel. So, you only had so many spots on the baby face side, and you had so many spots on the heel side. So, I really wasn't competing against the baby faces. I was competing against against the heels. I was competing against the baby faces. So it was the baby faces who were trying to take my spot. And, those are the guys that you have to worry about stabbing you in the back, So, I was a baby face, and I figured it out, and I hung out with, my friend was a heel. He wasn't after my spot, he was after a heel spot. And whenever we'd go in the ring, we'd try to have a great match, to help each other out, and that's the way the business worked back then, and we were, we competed against ourselves, but the bottom line is Vince McMahon was the one that controlled everything, and we didn't realize that.
And working in 1990, when you at the Survivor Series, you were teamed, obviously, in the final match with Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior against the, I believe it was Martel's team. But going off the subject there, during that night, the Undertaker debuted, and you did get to work with him briefly. But I mean, what were your thoughts of this big man coming in? Did you think he would actually be as big as he's become?
At the time, I really didn't, and when he first came in, there's a match on TV where I wrestled the Undertaker in Barcelona, Spain, and right, I don't know if it was, I think it was right after the Olympics, and in 1988, and I beat, I ended up beating the Undertaker that night, and at the time, I think Vince was debating, if they were going to go into South America and stuff, and I never heard it from anybody in the office, but I just thought that if the way they were building me at the time, I think they had bigger plans for me, and all of a sudden they, because Pat Patterson told me that we were going to start going into South America and Central America, and so they started pushing me, and all of a sudden they dropped the whole idea, and then all of a sudden, the push stopped, and before you know it, Bret Hart was the one that was, getting the push, and he went on to become the world champion, and they went into Canada pretty heavy.
Yeah, they did. And you mentioned that during your career, you were the quintessential good guy and never really got a chance to turn heel. Do you feel that maybe that's something you would have liked to have tried before, in back then, or at all, really? Or do you feel like you were okay with being a good guy?
No. When Rick Martel and I ended up splitting up, I asked Vince McMahon if I could be the heel. When we were they were starting to think about me and him having a little feud, and Vince said no. He said you need to stay as a baby face. There's a lot of things we can do with you as a baby face, But they already had a big plan of I didn't realize it. I was in the dark. Rick Martel coming in as the model. It's something that didn't happen overnight. It was all set up. Yeah. But I did want to try being a heel. I saw a lot of good wrestlers that were baby faces, and I saw them turn heel, and they were successful. And I felt that I knew the business as well as anybody did, and they were successful. I figured that I could have been a good heel also.
It would have been interesting to see, that's for sure. Because I remember growing up, I'd never seen you be a bad guy, and I was like, well, it was you. I put you in the same category as Ricky Steamboat, because both of you guys had a good career as good guys, but never had the chance to actually be bad guys. And I always wondered. And in this case, I'm asking you in this case, and I know you definitely wanted to try it, but that would have been interesting to see, without a doubt. And and what I didn't know, and for those who don't know, is that you actually do have your a book out about your career that was released back in 2008. Because I was going to ask you, because you've had this crazy career, in professional wrestling, even before and even after. And would you consider maybe writing a second novel or autobiography?
Well, yeah. I mean, the problem was the guy. The company that published my book went bankrupt, and they only published so many, and I never got a chance to promote it. I never got a chance to do anything, and I ended up getting a raw deal out of the whole thing. And but the only place I think you can still get I think I only have one copy in the house because they told me they had 3,000 in the warehouse, and I told them I'd buy all 3,000, and it came out that they didn't have any, and people liked it. The ones that got it, people liked it, and I wish I could find somebody who would want to republish it, but I haven't been lucky to find that.
That's definitely something I would have loved to have had a chance to get my hands on, because I love to hear the stories of guys who were in the business back then, as you were, and find out what it was like,
Yeah, I think if you go into Amazon, I hear people order it at Amazon. You might be able to.
Really? I'm gonna have to take a look.
Yeah, get it at Amazon.com, and I think you can get it for about $10.
Hey, that's awesome. I would definitely love to get my hands on that. And now, up to today, I mean, obviously you make appearances on the for Legends shows and independent. You still wrestle independently from time to time. How often would you say that you still go to the shows these days? And were you doing shows WrestleMania weekend this year?
I did do an appearance. Because I'm a full-time school teacher, I don't go out anywhere near as much as some of these guys that are making a living at it. But I do a couple of fundraisers a month. I enjoy doing it.
That's cool. Yeah. And
if anybody wants to contact, there's a website that a guy has for me.
Yes, I was just going to mention that. Yes. Go ahead.
It's TitoSantana.net, and that's how I get a lot of my appearances.
Absolutely. The only authorized website for Mr. Santana, TitoSantana.net. You get on there, you can find out everything, anything you need to know, want to know, to set up for appearances, as Mr. Santana said. But I also wanted to mention, since we're talking about the website, are you into the social media that's around today? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram?
No, I don't do any of that.
Because I know a lot of the celebrities, they do that as well, and not everybody, because I know that I spoken to Lanny a couple of years ago, and he obviously has his website set up, but from time to time, even he's on Facebook too now. So.
Yeah, it's too much work for me.
But you've had quite the career, and I have to say I'm going to definitely search for the book and definitely buy it. But if the opportunity arose, like for now in today's wrestling, if Vince McMahon or even Stephanie decided to approach you to say, you know what, we're looking to maybe thinking about bringing you back in as a commentator, maybe a manager, because I know that you had made a few appearances, I believe on the old school Raw a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I believe, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Would you have ever decided to come back in? I mean, see, they do part-time schedules for some of the part-timers that are on the roster now, but if they had offered you a shorter, where you'd be able to be home more, would that be something that you might consider doing in the near future, or even at all?
I would probably consider it. I wouldn't want to work a heavy workload, and to me, it's all about money. It's got to be worth me getting away from home.
Of course. You got your family. You got to take care of your family first.
Right. And they know that it's going to take a certain amount to get me away from home, and I'm proud. I'm happy to say that I don't really need to be out on the road at all anymore. I do it totally because I enjoy it, and of course, if I make an extra buck, I put 3 kids to college. It does help, but I'm still going to survive without being on the road. So
you definitely put away your money wisely. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And what many people don't know also is that I believe even if it's mentioned on there that you and your wife actually have a salon that she runs, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We've had the hair salon for a little over 17 years, you know, and it's been successful. You know, we have a great business. We have a established clientele, and it's in Roxbury in Succotash, New Jersey, and you know, throughout the year I work there every Tuesday. You know, after 3 o'clock when I get out of school, I go straight to our shop, and you know, I'm scheduled. And the reason that I'm scheduled every Tuesday is, you know, like if the kids want to come and get an autograph, I don't sign autographs at school. Or if any wrestling fan wants to come meet me on Tuesday, they know that, you know, I've always promoted the fact that I'm there on Tuesday afternoons.
And do people actually take you up on that and show up?
Huh?
People actually, you know, have you had quite the crowd show up there on Tuesdays from time to time?
Oh, yeah, there's always wrestling fans. I mean, there's a guy who came from England that
Are you serious? Wow.
They showed up. Yeah, it's amazing.
Awesome, really.
The people.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask Austin, did you have a question for Mr. Santana?
Yeah, one more question for me. I was going to say, if you had the opportunity of opening up a wrestling school, would you be interested in doing that one day?
No, it's not anything that I've ever been interested in doing. It's my body doesn't have very many bumps in it, you know. And to be a good teacher in the school, you have to get in there and mix it up with the guys. And I have no interest in doing that. It's
a lot of work and patience.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now I got to ask, touch on it real quick because I've always wanted to know, how did Jesse Ventura, because I believe it was Jesse that gave you the nickname of Tito Santana. Did he ever really approach you about that, or did it something that just came up in commentary and then you heard it later? How did that come about that he gave you that nickname?
I have no idea, but you know, Jesse was a good friend of mine, and you know, by Jesse calling me Chico, I never realized it, but when I first would go to the arenas, and it kind of used to piss me off when I'd hear a fan holler, "Hey, Chico!" But you know, it took me a while to realize, well, they're hearing it from Jesse, you know, and it was catching on, and you know, Jesse was over so big that, you know, if Jesse liked you, you know, and if he would get on you like that, it was better for me, you know. So in reality, by him putting me down, he was actually trying to help me. I had some great matches with Jesse, and Jesse told me that he's been asked many times if he had somebody to wrestle to work with, who would it be? And he says, I tell him Tito Santana every time.
That's an honor. That's awesome. And you were definitely inducted in the same class with Jesse that year, too.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, as far as today's wrestling, I mean, obviously back then when you were inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004, you had mentioned that up to that point you hadn't really kept up with the product at that time. Do you still catch it from time to time between school, work, and personal life and so forth? Do you ever really just sit down flipping through the channels and Raw's on, let me just watch it for a few minutes and see what's going on and so forth?
No, I never watch it. I watch, you know, like I would say maybe a couple of times I might want to watch a match if I see somebody, and then I see what's the action, and I say, well, I want to see how they're going to get out of this, and see, and then, you know, I realize that the guys that are in the ring don't have a clue of our style, you know,
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, our style is not necessary anymore. You know, it's a completely different business. You don't have to have the psychology that we had. You know, Vince McMahon makes it work. You know, now it's a TV show. It's totally entertainment. I mean, you do interviews and they tell you exactly what to say. You know, it's a completely different business. So, you know, it doesn't interest me one bit.
Now, you mentioned that, too, as far as the writers go. Back then, you guys had to really throw in your own, come up with your own promos when you're being interviewed and so forth. But if you could sum up Vince McMahon in one word, how would you sum up Vince McMahon, as far as obviously as long as you've known him and the kind of man he is and was to you, how would you sum up Mr. McMahon?
Workaholic.
That's for sure. That's a good word. And if you could offer any advice, and I'm pretty sure you get asked this quite a bit from young guys that you maybe see on the independents and so forth, that ask your advice about getting into the wrestling business. If there's a piece of advice that you could offer, what would you say to independent wrestlers trying to get into the business, or even just starting in the business? Excuse me.
For me, is make sure you get an education first. And
definitely,
if you're gonna, once you get the education, if you're gonna go for it, you got to go for it. I mean, you got to drop everything. And I mean, I left Texas and went to Florida. You know, I had never traveled on my own, and all of a sudden I'm in Florida trying to learn a new career. You know, I went for it. You know, you got to drop everything and you got to go for it and give it a certain amount of time. And if things don't work out, then you know you have the education to drop back on. Exactly,
and that makes perfect sense. And as far as one last question I wanted to ask you, excuse me, was you mentioned Andre and how good friends you guys were back then during the 80s and so forth. What I mean, being with Andre, he just seemed like such a larger than life character. I mean, obviously he was a great person. People have I've never heard anything bad said about him, and that says something about a person when nobody, even your colleagues, won't even say anything. Have never said anything bad about you. What was it like being around with Andre? I mean, the kind of man he was. Is there any memory that you would like to share about Andre that you remember or have a fond memory of him that you care to share?
Well, you know, a lot of people don't say the bad things about Andre, but if Andre liked you, he liked you. If he didn't like you, he let you know. I mean, there was a lot of wrestlers that Andre made life miserable for in the ring. You know, thank God that I wasn't one of them. You know, I had the privilege. I had the privilege of teaming up with him, but I mean, John Studd, I think you know, he was pretty upset. John Studd was the next guy, other than Andre, to get in the ring and step over the top rope, and Andre didn't appreciate that. And I mean, Andre would chase John Studd, and John Studd would run through the dressing room and just kept on going. He wouldn't let Andre catch him because Andre really wanted to get a hold of him. And I mean, he was scared shitless of Andre.
I imagine Andre was quite the intimidating force back then. I mean, like you said, if he didn't like you, you better stay away.
That's right.
And did you anticipate that WrestleMania III would be as big as it was back then? I mean, you had Hogan and Andre, you had Steamboat and Savage, and then there was many other matches. I mean, obviously, WrestleMania III, you think of Hogan and Andre, but did you guys really think that I mean, Vince, obviously, when he set his mind to doing something, he always follows through with it. But what was it like wrestling? I mean, being a part of a crowd at over 90,000 people.
Well, it was a perfect setup. You know, you had Hulk Hogan, who was over like $1 million, and then you had Andre the Giant, who had never been slammed, you know, in his career on national television. You know, I don't know if he'd ever been slammed by anybody else, but you know, nobody ever saw it. So it was something that people wanted to pay to see. You know, is Hogan going to be able to slam Andre the Giant? And you know, it happened. You know, it was something to be part of.
And as far as do you ever get people to come up to you and have you say, you know, come in and say Arriba? You know, they say that you're, you know, for because I was like your catch for your thing to say back then.
Yeah,
do you ever get people to come up to you to say that?
Yeah. People just like to hear me say it.
you know, you say it really good, and I would just say, if I can ask one last request from you, is to, you know, if you could just, you know, say it one time even on air for us, if that's okay.
Sure. Yes. Arriba!
There you go. That was awesome. Well, you know, I want to say on behalf of Austin and myself, Mr. Santana, It is indeed an honor, and has been for the last hour, to get to speak with you. And I know that you have with school coming up, and it's going to get a lot busier for you. So I'm glad I was able to catch you on a day that you're not too busy, so that you can kind of go back in time and talk about your career in wrestling and what you've been up to, what you're doing today, what you did back then, and just some of the great memories you shared with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It has indeed been an honor, sir. And
Definitely.
Austin, did you have any final words for Mr. Santana?
Yes, I wanted to say that it's been an honor to speak with you, and I have so much respect for everything you've done, in your career and your life, and just thank you for everything, all your accomplishments.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you too, Felix.
Not a problem, sir. It is, and hopefully we have that. If we can, if I get the book, I'm definitely going to mention it on my future radio, or even send you an email, tell you my thoughts on the book, because I am looking forward to reading it. That's for sure.
Okay.
But it has been an honor, sir, and thank you again. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care of yourselves.
All right, you too now. Bye-bye.